It has been very, very interesting and exciting recording session. For me, it's a special experience to record pieces that haven't been sometimes even played or recorded before, so it's like really creating something new.
The idea came about because we were looking to record these rare pieces by William Wordsworth, and Toccata Classics has various deals across Europe with orchestras where you can do sessions, and Martin Anderson, who runs it, and I discussed it, and I'd been to Latvia before and had a lovely time in Sasis, so I was very much in favour of coming out to Liepaja. I heard the orchestra on one of their recordings and thought, yes, that would work very nicely. And so last year I came out and re-recorded the first volume of William Wordsworth. I'm very passionate about composers who've been neglected, and in England in particular we get composers neglected for reasons beyond the value of the music. It can be because they are not favoured by people within the musical establishment, or circumstances in their life mean that they just miss out on big opportunities and the music gets forgotten about.
In this project I'm playing with British conductor John Gibbons. I met him 9 years ago and we have played many different piano concertos, of course concertos from piano repertoire that are being played all the time, but John is also introducing artists to less known pieces. So we've performed 2 concertos by William Alwyn before, and now this recording of the piano concerto by William Wordsworth is really very special experience.
Arta won my first piano competition in Sussex, and she is a fine example of a pianist who's not been given the recognition that she deserves, and it's always been such a joy to work with her. Some soloists, you do a nice musical performance but you don't feel a connection, but I'm very lucky that a lot of my soloists I can feel a real connection with what they want to do musically, what I want to do musically, and if you're in harmony with somebody in that sense, you want to keep working with them. And then it was the same with Kamila. She came along having won a competition in West London and played Bartók second violin concerto with me, and we all thought that she'd done an amazing job on it.
It's exciting, but it's also a little bit unusual to record a concerto that was never recorded before and something that you never heard, especially these days. Even if something is not on actual CD, you know, people record live performances and they put it on YouTube, so it's almost difficult to escape from not hearing a piece of music. We don't know how this is supposed to sound with the orchestra, you don't have it in your ears. So, of course, you can run it with piano, but it really isn't the same.
The violin concerto is about 10 years later, 1955 he's writing this piece. And the critics at the time, Michael Kennedy, the famous Manchester critic, actually said that this was probably his most important work and showed a really strong sense of symphonic writing. Some of the critics sort of felt it was quite harsh and bitter, and I think one of the things we found here is that it's much more lyrical than that. It's you could feel a real sense of wonderment and almost exotica about it. It feels like there's sort of elements of almost Arabic music within it. There are sort of obviously fiery, tough moments in it, but they're much more about strong rhythms going on. In the 1960s, there was a very big change of style within the broadcasting company BBC, and the BBC decided that we needed to be listening to very avant-garde modern music, and any composer who was writing lyrical, romantic music would only get a very occasional performance.
There is a lot of treasure in archives, in private homes, in libraries. And the thing is to find that treasure and find trusting people who are ready to give you that treasure and make use of it. Because what use of music if it's not being played? The music has to live.
What's magical about the music is that there's an integrity about the composer. The composer has decided that he's not going to follow the dictates of the time, that he's not going to write music that's difficult to listen to. He wants to write music that comes from his heart, and that comes through all the way through in it. And there may be some moments that are sort of quite tough, but that's because life is tough. And this is a composer who was a pacifist in the Second World War, worked on the land, and would have faced a lot of prejudice because of taking that conscientious objection to fighting. In England, in the Second World War, that would have been looked down on by many people. And particularly after the war, when you're trying to start rebuilding musical life, I think it would have been quite difficult. There would have been some people who wouldn't have said anything to you yourself, but would have just said, he didn't fight. Come on, why are we giving him an opportunity? The Concerto for piano is quite an early work. It's written just after the Second World War, and it's written for a friend of his, Clifford Curzon. Clifford Curzon is a very important pianist in Britain around this period. There's quite a few composers who write concertos for him. Another concerto is the first concerto of William Alwyn, which was written for Curzon, which actually Arta has also played with me.
Well, this concerto, it really does have a feeling of a conversation or a fight between individual with certain contrasting opinions to the society, and orchestra giving the message back that no, you're not right.
When you prepare all the scores, you work at it, we've done rehearsals with the piano, but the moment that you come into this amazing hall and the orchestra starts to play, the music goes into a completely different level. The sounds that the composer is able to conjure up in both the concertos is astonishing. There's moments in the violin concerto where he's using the vibraphone and the harp, and it's like we're looking ahead towards Harry Potter. Modern film music, it's extraordinary, the delicate colours that are going on. Recording is always an interesting challenge because you're working in a different way from preparing a performance. I have my vision of how it's going to sound and what it needs to work structurally, how I need to keep the music flowing and the pacing of the pieces in my head, and hoping that I can bring that to everybody and then give people the best chance to hear this music and make the acquaintance of this. Pastoral sketches we're going to end the sessions with. I have a suspicion. Looking at the orchestral parts, I don't think that they've ever been opened. So we are wondering, not only is it the first time it's being recorded, but maybe it's the first time the piece has ever been played. There are no markings in the woodwind or brass parts that I've seen. A couple of bowings in the violins, but that's because we've got them bowed ready for today. But it's the nature of the paper. It's really old 1937 paper, and you can see where there's actually changes have been made in his revision, and it's been stuck in. And there's no markings around it. Usually you would expect to see signs of pencils, of people marking little changes, but there's nothing. So I suspect that this is the first time this music may ever have been played. And it's been sitting in a library, higher library, and then in a music centre library since 1937.
I just hope people will find this concerto interesting, and I would like to check out this composer, his other pieces, or maybe some violinist would like to actually add it to the repertoire.
We should be able to record as much music that's there, so that anybody, if they want to, have an open mind, can listen to it. I think one of the extraordinary things about complex, what's termed classical music, is that it's sometimes difficult for people to get into because it's long, it requires a different thought process from maybe a short little snippet of pop. You've got to think in a different way. And I think I've always found that particularly when people are younger, they don't seem to, they're sometimes resistant to that idea that you listen in a longer time frame. But I think as we get older, you develop the art of thinking more in longer paragraphs and allowing music to have more time to speak. So I think it's very important that we give everybody opportunities to hear whatever music is out there.